code event. Yeah, and probably start my screen. Why I cannot find this? Oh, yes. Okay, fine, got it. Hi, good morning, everybody. I believe most people, if based in China and others, are good morning, except us from Australia and probably New Zealand. And if you are from other part of the world, it should be all good morning. And thanks for coming for this event. We are, as ISETS, I will briefly explain who we are and who am I. But first, I want to briefly mention that this is actually a special forum, Energy Transition Forum for ISETS, and it's organized by International Society for Energy Transition Study and hosted by the Australia-China Relations Institute at the University of Technology, Sydney, and co-hosted by two organizations from China. One is Energy Observer and another is Prevention and Administrative Collaborative Innovation Center for Emission Trading Schemes. Please allow me quickly explain why we have this event. As people who follow up the Australia policy now that 15th of June, roughly 2 weeks ago, Australia energy market operator suspend so-called national electricity market. That's the first time. And on one hand, Australia electricity market is considered to be one of the most successful electricity market in the world. It's run smoothly and successfully, but we face such a dramatic actions from the energy market operator. And also for people who are looking at the energy crisis and energy transition, we also know that things also happened in terms of power shortage happened in China in last year, particularly the second half last year. And very interesting, at that time, one of the debate or discussion said that China doesn't have a functional electricity market, because if there is electricity market, your cost from the fuel should be passed to the consumer. Then one of the suggestions that China need to have a functional electricity market. And on the other hand, this year we find that Australia have an electricity market, but very unfortunately, we have to suspend because it worked too well. It actually pass all the costs even to the consumer. There will be a affordability issue. I think that's probably one of the motivation for me actually to quickly comment this event. And also thanks for our panelists and co-host to echo this short notice and coming here. We explain the panelists later on. Today we will proceed. After my brief introduction, we will invite Mr. Feng Jie as the Executive Editor-Chief for Energy Observer to give a short welcome speech as well. We will have 3 keynotes remark. Dr. Sylvain Tesk will lay a broader picture of energy transition. And we also have Dr. Liang Zhifei from China will talk about China's electricity market. And again, we have Mr. Dr. Liang Wagner from Adelaide University talking about Australia side. And then we will open a panel discussion with a few questions and issues raised by Mr. Jiang Li. And for the members, we have Professor Song Feng from Renmin University of China. We have Associate Professor Rabindra Nepal from University of Wollongong, and also Dr. Niu Dongshen, who was a AGL senior energy analyst. We have Mu Yi, have a senior analyst from NBN. So you see, we have a quite mix of dialogue. The reason I put more like a stare of 2 nations, because I think quite interesting to see how things are going on, particularly for the 2 countries are major energy producing country, and ironically we are face of shortage. Let's for the discussion. Before I pass to Ms. Feng, I'll just quickly explain what is ISETS. On my understanding that the event is a live stream, so probably a lot of people are watching this. ISETS is a kind of non-profit professional organization we registered in Australia. It's the planning start from late 2019, and the society was launched in June 2020. Interestingly, before China's carbon neutral planning was unveiled. And the purpose for this is to create a kind of platform to discuss the issue and the challenges among various stakeholders during the energy transition. The energy crisis is one of the examples. We didn't foresee this, but this is one of the topics we planning to discuss for this kind of forum, because we understanding even carbon neutrality is a determinant goal. But during the process, there are a lot of issues, challenges to be explored. And in order to solve that issue, academic or politicians are probably not enough. We need to discuss among academic, politicians, and industry and others. So we created this forum, and we have 31 founding members, 17 of them volunteer to be our first council. Council is the daily management for us. And among them, we have further eight of them volunteered, green ones at the executive committee. So we are run by volunteer. We don't have any funding from any institute organization. We are purely individuals, associations, and for mutual dialogues. We are planning few things ahead, like annual conference, the international one, because of COVID. Otherwise, we would already have. Because of COVID, our first international conference expected to be probably November 2023, and as a part of the Third Asia Pacific Energy Forum Ministry Forum program, either in Thailand or Indonesia, has not been finalized yet. We are also planning to have a national conference to bring the dialogue together. We also actually run a few ordinary events. One of them is the Energy Transition Forum we are expecting today. Last week, we just have the V dialogue. I will briefly explain. We also have a webinar in August. And for this particular energy forum, we already have 3, both in China. Actually, the first two, the first one was physically. The second and third one, because of COVID, again, we couldn't do it physically. But these are kind of small events which people can gather together to discuss the issue of mutual interest. And today is the 4th one. And our 5th one, we're likely planning in Tokyo in October. For our events, like the last week, we have first V dialogue with Professor Kilin. For people in the energy economics, probably all know him. He's one of the not many energy economics published in AERI and others world best in energy, economic journal. We already have a co-transition events including report. We also have a lot of partnership events, like we recently one we had with the Global Gas Center on revisiting the transition law on natural gas. All the video now is online. And we also have a publication, which is a key vehicle for us to share knowledge among the communities, working paper, commentary, and newsletter and report. We actually welcome members to submit their view and things to both working paper and commentary. And I always hear people say how to join us. One thing is very simple, just log in our website and register. That is free. Free permanently. The reason we designed that because my understanding, a lot of people from less developed country have difficult to access knowledge. While those of us from developed country, we are privileged to have this kind of knowledge sharing is not a hurdle for us. But people from less developed country face different challenges. So we designed this society to be a platform which actually whoever is interested want to receive our knowledge sharing products and things will be free to access permanently. Only when people who are interested to construct to the society, contribute to society building to be a full member. But so far, we don't actually recruit or encourage people to for full member yet. We think it's better when, or what do we need, put another way, we need is manpower, not the money. So we actually welcome people to voluntarily work for the secretary or organize the events. We also welcome institute to be partner or institute member. But for individuals, we probably will not develop full member, fee pay member until we have a major event. And the only difference between fee pay full member and associate member is voting. The rest are same. As I said, the society purely for the benefit of non-profit, and we put a few way to collect to us, and that's all. So with that, I stop my introduction. Now I invite Ms. Feng Jie from Energy Observer to give a quick welcome remark. Feng Jie, the floor is yours.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much, Dr. Xunpeng. My name is Feng Jie. I'm running Energy Observer magazine. It's my honor to join the forum and get an opportunity to make new friends from China and Australia. In particular, I would like to thank Dr. Shi Xunpeng for his effort to make this event happen and bring together experts from the two countries to share ideas and this crucial turning point in global energy transition. The focus of this forum is on electricity spot market suspension in Australia, but it has profound, far-reaching policy implications and can shed light on China's electricity market reform and even challenges faced by global energy sector. For instance, how shall we respond to the impacts of surging global energy price on electricity markets and even to the universal phase in energy marketization itself? And against the background of the unfolding global energy crisis, will global energy transition be accelerated or delayed? How will market designers in different countries adapt to the power crunch caused by primary energy supply shortage and energy price increase? When it comes to China, lessons from Australia and the broader international community are helpful for Chinese makers to enhance policy flexibility to fulfill the challenging targets of energy safety supply and low carbon transition. Well, I think I have thrown out too many and too broad questions, and I will stop here. So I'm looking forward to the forthcoming presentations and discussions. Thanks again to all the speakers and commentators for your participation. Finally, I would like to promote my magazine a little bit. Please subscribe, follow up, and like our articles on WeChat. And in the near future, hopefully, our English webpage. And we sincerely invite all you to write for EO. Thank you and hope this forum will be a great success. Yeah.
Yes, thanks, Ms. Feng Jie, for the very, very nice and very sharp discussion and welcome. And before I hand over the floor to Sivin, can all the participants here, if you have a camera, turn on your camera, probably have a screenshot for our record purpose. Yeah, you have a screen. You have a screen. Yeah, please turn on the screenshot. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So now I will start our program. Our first, we have a 3 keynote speaker. As I mentioned, the first speaker will be Dr. Sivin Tesik. Sorry, Sivin. I probably didn't pronounce your family name correctly. Sivin is my colleague working in the Institute of Sustainable Future at UTS. He's a well-known expert on renewable energy climate change issue. He is one of the IPCC author and have published quite a few intensive reports to support the COP negotiations, including more recent one in the Glasgow. I put his detailed CV in the meeting agenda. We will share again after this meeting. So without further ado, I will leave Sivin to start the keynote session. Sivin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rock, and hopefully you can see my screen. I just said, yeah, good. Yeah, my name is Sven Teske, and I'm originally a German engineer. I'm now working in Australia almost 10 years, and I'm an associate professor at the Institute for Sustainable Futures at the University of Technology. What I will do is I will basically come from a very broad angle of sort of what's happening right now in sort of climate science, where are we on the energy and emission side, and where do we need to go. So I'm not going into details about the electricity market, which I understand is the job for other speakers. I'm just trying to provide the framework. First I start with the carbon budget. In order to understand what happened over the past, almost like 300 years, and don't worry, I'm not going back 300 years, I'm just showing 2 slides about it. So we basically started with the Industrial Revolution around 1800, and that caused a lot of energy-related CO2 emissions. If we look into the shares of the historical emissions, Europe and the United States have the largest proportion as regions. China still is about half of that, but catching up very rapidly. And the other regions in the world have less emissions, but still also increasing. So that is basically the snapshot of energy-related emissions in the past. And the reason why I give that context is that for climate change effects, for all the processes in the atmosphere, the accumulative CO2 is important. So the energy-related CO2 emissions, which remains in the atmosphere for a long time, is important. Not who is emitting and when, but that the emission actually took place in the past. If we look at the world economy, that is the global GDP development since then. So we have a very clear accumulation between the economic output globally and the CO2 emission, which is not sort of new science, but I just want to put that in the context. So if we look at the relationship between GDP, energy demand, and CO2 emission, the gray area is the energy demand, and blue is the GDP. Then we see that we were actually able to decouple energy demand and GDP increase quite a bit, which is good news. Some countries already started the decoupling of energy demand, rising energy demand, and with the same percentage rising GDP and energy demand, CO2 emissions already many years ago, like Denmark, for example, decoupled energy growth and GDP growth already in the 1970s. And the next step is basically to also decarbonize the entire energy system, which means that we will always need energy for GDP, but we not always need to emit CO2 emissions if we want to produce energy. So what is the carbon budget? The carbon budget has been published from the IPCC Assessment Report 6 in May last year. And it says that if we emit a cumulative between 2020 and 2050, 500 gigatons on a global level, we have a chance to limit global warming to plus 1.5 degrees with a 50% chance. If we emit only 400 gigatons in that time, the chances rise to 67%. And if we want to have an 83% chance of 1.5 degrees, then we only have to emit 300 gigatons. 300 gigatons is a rather ambitious, if not unrealistic, target. because we currently have a global CO2 emission of about 35 gigatons. So that means we have to decarbonize within 8 years. That's probably a bit too ambitious. In my studies, when we work on 1.5 degree scenarios, we aim to remain within the 500 gigaton limit. So if we look at the trend versus what we actually need to do, so the black line is basically the trend of global CO2 emission if we take into account how the energy intensity per dollar GDP and the emission intensity per energy unit decreases or develops. That is sort of the black line. And if we look at what we actually need to do in order to remain in that budget, then you see the red line. So it is rather a cliff where we need to go than a phase out in order to remain in the budget. You also see a little blip in the beginning of the black curve before it becomes sort of the red curve. That is the COVID effect, but unfortunately, the reduction only lasts less than a year, and it was back to the emission of the previous year, even actually a little bit higher. So how can we achieve to remain within that carbon budget without basically shutting down the economy and without basically risking a just transition, because we also know that we basically have to move a lot of energy jobs from carbon intensive to no carbon jobs in the energy market. And there are models like ours, which I'm not going into detail. I'm just giving a few examples. I showed that again in terms of where we want to be. There is another scenario from the International Energy Agency, which is called Net Zero 2050, which operates with 500 gigatons budget, but the majority of the models have between 400 and 500 gigatons. So again, this is a little bit more illustrated what we need to do. The black curve, as I said, is fossil fuels and also process emissions, and the orange, green, and dark green are land use emissions. So it's not only required that we have to decarbonize the energy system entirely, but until 2050, we also have to actually change the way we have our land use, and to create land use emissions, and actually to have negative emissions, which means we have to absorb with ecosystems like forests carbon in the atmosphere. So the One Earth climate model, we're working on that since 2018, is a model which is to some extent similar to the International Energy Agency's model for the World Energy Outlook, and in some aspects very different. One big difference is that we have a sector boundaries which are according to the global industry classification standards, and so therefore have a very high technical resolution for industry sectors. And we actually only use technologies which are available right now on the market, which means we do not use CCS, as CCS is not market ready. And if we look back in the last 30 years of research, there is very little, if any, progress made. And currently, all the CCS equipment available globally, according to the IEA, reduces or takes 40 million tons CO2 out of the atmosphere, or out of the emission, actually, not the atmosphere, from energy-related processes. That is 40 million tons. That's roughly 4 hours of global emissions. And even the most ambitious CCS scenario from the IEA, they increase that to 160 million tons, which means we go from 4 hours global emission to 16 hours global emissions by 2030, what we avoid. So this shows you that CCS for climate mitigation is highly irrelevant, and therefore we don't put it in our model. So the carbon budget I already said, and the GDP projection, population projection is what when we work on it equal to the World Bank and to the UN. Look at the IPCC. What is the IPCC actually calculating or factoring in as the main mitigation potential? And the blue and orange bars are basically show the potential of different technologies according to their cost benefit. So solar and wind by far the most important renewable energy sources, followed by bioelectricity and hydropower and geothermal. Nuclear is part of it, but very small. Nuclear is obviously not a renewable energy source. And then CCS is down the line with lower potentials and significantly higher costs. If we look at the building sector, energy efficiency is the most has one of the highest potential and has very high return of investments. It's fairly cheap. Same for transport efficiency, and also electrification of processes across all sectors to replace fuels by electricity is basically the way to go in most of the decarbonization scenarios, which means the electricity market we are talking about today will become more and more important, because it basically means that the energy which won't flow via gas pipelines or oil pipelines or via coal transport, that energy content to some extent will flow through electricity cable, and that means we actually need to change the infrastructure to transport electricity as well. In terms of the carbon budget, we have calculated the carbon budget for different industry on the global level. We are currently working on regional level. So the cement industry, for example, would have a remaining budget of 9 gigatons, steel 19. So we basically calculated and broke down all the different from the energy perspective, and then from the energy supplies perspective as a second step to calculate the emissions, what the carbon budget is. And you see buildings is a very big proportion, because buildings are not very quick to change. Buildings are there, the substance, the constructions are in many countries on average 80 years and older. And that means that renovation rates can only be that quick, and therefore the budget is relatively high. If we look at the emission from primary energy on the left, secondary energy on utilities, and end use on the right, that is published. So I'm pretty sure you can't really read it on your screen, but just want to show it. You see how the emission goes from the source from the primary energy all the way to the end use sector, and how that is distributed. Look at the energy supply. So we have seen the budget. We have seen quickly, roughly, in what direction we need to go with the energy supply. And now we see what really happens. And that is taken from the Global Status Report Renewables, which has been launched only a week ago, and that compares the energy, the share of modern renewable energy 2009, 19, and 20. And the sad news is that not much has changed. And actually, even due to COVID, the lower energy demand also has led to a lower share, roughly only a small percentage lower share of fossil fuels, and we're basically almost back to the 80% before. So with all the huge efforts and huge successes in renewable energy, in terms of primary energy on a global level, unfortunately, the share hardly increased of renewables. Look at the trends on a global level. The majority of the large economies have a significantly too high share on fossil fuels and on significantly too low on renewables. Basically, all countries which are not orange and yellow have a too low share and need to improve. In terms of the final energy consumption and the renewable energy share, so heating and cooling is 51% of the final energy on a global level. Only 11% is supplied by renewables. Transport 32%, and heating and cooling, by the way, that's basically buildings and industry. Transport is a third, and only less than 4% are from renewables, and power is 28% and 17% renewable share, which is the best basically in that. And we see that renewable electricity actually takes off and is quite successful in many countries, notably China, which is in charge for more or less half the solar and wind market globally. Another snapshot of what happened over the past 10 years, the renewable energy share by the different sectors. If you look at power, the last slide was on a global level, and that percentage was part of the global energy, and this is just the share of within the sector. So power went from 19 to 26%. That's a success, but still a bit too slow. Buildings from 10 to 15. That's far too slow. Industry and agriculture only an increase of 4%. And transport is almost neglectable, 1.2% plus. So we hope that the electrification of the transport system will lead to higher shares, and this electricity, which needs to come from renewables in order to make a difference for the emissions, that will lead to a significantly higher electricity demand. So again, the power market will be key for decarbonization, and we will be front and center in the future for energy policy. As we model more than 50 countries around the world, and our experience is that roughly if we have high electrification rates in transport and heating and process heat, for industry, the electricity demand of a country roughly doubles. So that's a rule of thumb. It's not entirely correct, but if you just want to have a feeling of how much more electricity you need, you probably need twice as much electricity, and that electricity needs to come entirely from renewables in order to make it carbon neutral, in order to make the energy demand carbon neutral. Finally, the global trends in renewables by source. Hydropower basically increased with the increase of the electricity demand. So it sort of kept the share. Nuclear went down because hardly any new reactors are built due to enormous costs and very high or cost overruns and construction times of 10 years and more. So nuclear will be for the next 10 years, or next 20 years for saving carbon emissions, will be highly irrelevant, because even if the nuclear reactor would be started building today, it will not contribute to emission reduction in 2030. And we have bioenergy, which remained on the same level. So solar and wind is basically the main backbone of that renewable electricity expansion. And finally, this is what needs to be done. That was 2021. We had an additional capacity of 315 gigawatts, which is significant. And if we look in the past, I mean, if you would have asked some experts 10 years ago if it's possible to have 300 gigawatts of new solar and wind mainly in 1 year, everyone would have said no, but it is actually possible. But we actually need to triple that market again in order to be on track of what I said in terms of the decarbonization. Last but not least, policies on a very broad level in order to remain under plus 1.5 degrees. We need to actually stop investments in new oil, coal, and gas projects globally in all countries. And that is actually backed by the last International Energy Agency report as well. They say no further investments in new oil, gas, and coal projects. Secondly, we need to have a CO2 price. Thirdly, all the OECD countries need to phase out coal by 2030. My two home countries, first Germany and Australia, are both not on track. That needs to change. The automobile industry must phase out internal combustion engines by 2030 as well. And we need more efficiency standards and renewable energy target based on IPCC carbon budgets, and mandatory transport forward-looking historic disclosure for energy intensity in order for the finance industries. We develop also policies for the finance industries and for industry itself, but I'm already a little bit over time, so I stop here. And as I said, this is just a broad picture, sort of a broad brush of where we need to go. It was not my task to go into details, but you see the electricity, the policy around power markets will be the key front and center policy to implement a decarbonization on the global level.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen, for the very nice and very comprehensive introduction, and also congratulations on those significant output and research. I think Stephen highlights the urgency and the importance of energy transition, and also one message is that even we have done a great job so far, but it's still far from enough. And including both Germany and Australia as an OECD and rich country are still a lot on the track to meet what we need to achieve. That's one of the story, or our key theme today is that when the energy transition met the energy crisis. So now we actually turn to the more practical level, how to operate level, and which is also the reason for the so-called energy crisis coming. Our next presenter is Dr. Liang Zhifei. He is energy economics with practical experience. He's currently working on the Guangzhou Electric Exchange, or the China's South Grid, as a deputy general manager for the policy section. So let's hear what his view. He has been working in the sector for quite a long. So let's hear what his view, and more like a down to the earth, how actually energy crisis or we avoid energy crisis in the future during the energy transition to provide actually reliable, secure, and affordable electricity for the public. Dr. Liang, now I leave the floor with you. Okay, it seems there might be some connection issue. If it's really difficult, you probably turn off your camera. I also turn off my camera to save the band. I think there is some connection issue, right?
梁博士，如果流量不足，您可以关掉摄像头，只开声音就可以。
So okay, if difficult, we can swap the agenda.
施老师，我联系一下梁博士，稍等啊。
Yeah, just. Hi, Liam. Are you amenable to actually, if we have difficulty, you can give presentation first, then we can ask Dr. Liang to do it later. You can see the screen.
Sorry, I'm just transferring my slides. Sorry, I just realized I was on mute. Hang on a second.
Okay. But 那个冯姐, we can actually let Liang 博士 to do the second, so he will have time to sort out.
Yeah, okay, fine.
Yeah. Liang, actually, why not you can start first? We can ask Liang 博士 to stop the sharing, so we can have the screen. I think he has some little bit problem now. Okay. Yeah, sorry for the technical challenges. That's how actually life is what we are experiencing in energy transitions. We have a good wish, we have a determined target, but during all the process, we always face challenge and things, which one of the reasons we are sitting here to discuss. And I probably will introduce Dr. Liang Wagner. He is an energy expert. Particularly, he has both practical experience as well as academic experience in terms of the study of the electricity market. He has been, I see, he has been getting a significant amount of funding for study of the Australian market. Today, he probably more like explain from the producer's perspective what are the behavior and the change motivations. Liam, probably I leave the floor with you.
Yeah, I'll just bring up my slides now. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I can see slide.
Yep.
Just show
Okay.
the screen.
Great.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah.
Hi. So my name's Liam Wagner. I'm an associate professor at the University of Adelaide in the Centre for Global Resources and Food. So obviously electricity is a resource. And these, which is now within the School of Economics and Public Policy. So today, obviously, I'm going to talk about Australia's electricity crisis or energy crisis, which is largely a long-term failure in policy. This is our own faults rather than the circumstances of the machinery of the system. So I will, move on. So obviously, Australia is going through a bumpy transition. We've had a lack of policy formation over the last 10 years with previous federal government. And as a consequence, we've had other actors within the system who have had to step in and to form policy, which has largely been sort of around the edges rather than having a coordinated approach. So state governments and, of course, the Australian Energy Market Commission and the Australian Energy Regulator have been trying to keep the lights on, as it were, and sort of making small policy shifts. I think the most recent and most controversial one of the AEMC was the potential for distribution network operators to charge producers of solar energy and households for exporting to the grid. So for the privilege of doing so. So that was sort of went down very badly. But yeah, they've been basically operating at the margins without the lead of federal government. There have been a number of policy proposals, however, say, for instance, the National Energy Guarantee, which was largely ineffectual. And of course, none of the state governments wanted to agree. So of course, we have, because of the nature of our Australian Federation, while indissoluble, each state has certain obligations for their energy sector, and of course to operate, the electricity system within their state. But they've all signed up to be members. So the eastern states, I should say, have signed up to be members of the National Electricity Market. So the NEM is obviously Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania, and South Australia. So we leave out Northern Territory and WA for our discussion. And I don't usually talk about WA because their market is very different to ours. So the one thing to remember, as I said, that this is a crisis of our own creation, is that the Australian eastern states have no domestic reservation policy for natural gas. So Australia has largely, or is one of the largest exporters of liquefied natural gas to the world. So certainly not one of the largest producers of gas overall. So obviously Russia was enormous at piping gas into Europe. But Australia is certainly a major producer of LNG, certainly to Asia, which is our key market, and of course where we are linked to the market price, the Japanese KIF price, the cargo insurance and freight. But we obviously don't have this domestic reservation policy, which is of serious concern in times like this, which has directly affected our electricity system. But WA has none of these issues, and it does have a domestic reservation policy to keep the gas onshore, so that a certain amount of gas must be produced for domestic use and available for domestic use. And its price, while linked to the Asian markets, the domestic gas price is really just the marginal cost of production plus some profit. It's fairly low by comparison to the eastern states. I'll just get. So here's, of course, the eastern states. Just excuse me for a second. I have had caught several colds from my children. And we've had COVID in the house for the last 6 weeks. So yeah, excuse me. So obviously the eastern states, this is the longest electricity market in the world. It goes all the way from Cape York in Queensland down through Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia, and of course we have a giant extension cable crossing the Bass Strait to Tasmania. So as Sven previously mentioned, our energy mix, for lack of a better term, is awful. I'll be polite, is awful for our electricity sector. So within the NEM, we still use a very, this is as of today, so the last 7 days, sorry, 12 months, I should say, we've got, nearly 70% coal, which is a joke, 7% gas, and renewables are starting to make a bit more of a headway. So obviously we've got about 18% of solar and wind, and of course another 9% in hydro, which is, we haven't really installed any additional hydro in Australia of much significance. There was a plan, of course, there is a plan to expand our largest hydro operator, Snowy Hydro, which was built in the 1950s, which is, it's fantastic, but of course it relies on the storage of water and has in the past, and particularly in 2006 and 2007, endured a great deal of uncertainty with its ability to actually capture the snowmelt. So there was a significant drought in 2007, which really shaped the available supply of water into the system, and we did nearly have another crisis then. So I'll move on now. That's the NEM. Sorry, I just have to move my little grid thing so I can actually see the words. So the national electricity market prices obviously have been spiking quite significantly. Our maximum price is of the order of $15,000 a megawatt hour. And as an energy only market, that can lead to obviously lots of volatility for generators to be able to recover their costs in times of uncertainty, and for peak fire generators, mainly dual fuel or multi-fuel open cycle gas turbines. So they can capture their longer marginal costs because they're only operating, hopefully, for 3 to 5% a year. So obviously the natural gas prices spiked following the Ukrainian conflict. And of course, that's usually, I guess, associated with the embargo of Russian gas going into Europe, and Europe then pulling significant supply potential from the Middle East and, of course, Africa. So that withdrew capacity from the South Asia and, of course, from the Far East. And as a consequence, that obviously drove up Japanese prices in excess. I think the peak was over $40 a gigajoule, which is insane. Normally this stuff should only go for 10 to 15 bucks. So to go, fairly quickly above 40 or even above 35 is quite concerning. But, you know, of course, there was just a significant withdrawal of supply or acceptable supply from the international market of gas. So, you know, the shifting demand, you know, obviously, you know, pulling that gas into Europe. So Australian domestic prices for natural gas on the spot market, which is, you know, really only the gas that's left over that's not put onto a ship. So that represents the opportunity cost for gas-fired gas generators. I mean, the marginal cost for most of the gas that Australia produces is less than $5 a gigajoule. Certainly within Queensland and New South Wales, the coal seam gas is, you know, while not particularly cheap, it was, but now it's about sort of $4, $5 a marginal cost. So jumping from $9, I think was about the price in April, earlier in the year, and certainly last year, to well over $35 and $40. It did peak at, I think, 47 in South Australia on the Adelaide hub. Creates a bit of a problem. So gas generators, of course, saw their spark spread disappear. So, I mean, their opportunity cost of either sticking it on a ship or their decision of sticking it on a ship and exporting their gas supply for their generators, or to burning it here, it was quite obvious. You know, either they bid into the market to recover their potential lost earnings, which they did, they tried to, but this, of course, then brought on the implementation of the market safety measures. So when obviously the national electricity market wants to reduce volatility and uncertainty for not only generators, but also the retailers and for, in effect, consumers in the long run. And I don't want to pay more for my electricity. I mean, you could be joking. So anyway, so the market safety measures really look at the last 7 days. So when the sum of prices, and this isn't a volume weighted average, it's just the time sum of the last 7 days prices for all wholesale market periods of 5 minutes, when I think it's 1.2 million. When it reaches that, the market operator instantly assesses as to whether there's something going on, and they would have been assessing this quite frequently throughout the period. And so they decided to implement a $300 cap on all regions. So the $300 cap is one of the most frequently sold wholesale market caps for onto retailers, so they can guarantee a maximum price for their electricity that they are going. So that's about for their the retail customers. So $300, yeah, what's that? 30 cents a kilowatt hour. So that's about what I'm paying. But they'll pay a premium to obtain a hedge position to be able to get a guaranteed supply. So we move on to, of course, this led to, you know, we're obviously having a cold snap. I'm not used to the cold, having lived in Queensland for most of my life and now living in Adelaide. It's freezing, but we've had cold snaps, and so the demand for electricity, particularly for heating, had also been going up. And during this winter period, because we don't normally experience that much cold weather, and we do have gas, a lot of people do use gas in the southern states for heating. You know, there are obviously scheduled maintenance periods for coal generators because they are getting old. Some of them are older than most, you know, many people's mothers. They're, you know, in their 60s, some of them 50s, and their fathers. So it's, you know, they're getting on, long in the tooth. So they obviously they require a much shorter cycle for A, B, and C type inspections to ensure that they are safe to operate and they can be relied upon. So they were going into scheduled maintenance, and that withdrew, you know, a fair bit of capacity of coal generation. So, and there was also unscheduled outages due to, you know, a number of reasons, but aging plant affected supply. So with that, in turn, gas generation obviously saw their spark spread disappear, and when the market cap was implemented, you know, why burn it for electricity if they can make an awful lot of money and not lose potential income, you know, and generating. So the market operator, of course, and the state government stepped in to ensure the security of supply. I mean, the federal government does have some remit over the market operation and, of course, national policy and under security caveats of the National Electricity Law. But the state governments are still, I guess, the person on the ground who would then, of course, talk to the market operator. And so generators were forced to start up and bring on supply, of course, to deal with this lack of reserves. So we were going through periods of weeks on, a couple of weeks in a row where we had lack of reserve warnings, and we were at lack of reserve 3, which meant that we were heading for blackouts, and we're being warned of potential blackouts across Australia, or across the eastern states anyway. Not in Western Australia or Northern Territory. They were just fine. So that's sort of what happened. But then, of course, the gas operators are playing billion-dollar chicken. They know that they have an obligation under the National Electricity Law to operate and ensure the security of supply. And with the market caps, obviously that spark spread disappeared, and they sold, they were trying to sell off their excess gas for the time periods leading up to the intervention, to be able to, make more money. That's certainly a very rational thing to do. And of course, it's certainly within their power to do so until they are instructed by the National Electricity Market Operator, AEMO, to turn back on. So this really highlights Australia's, lack of foresight and certainly the states to foresee that we needed a gas reservation policy. And, it's been highlighted many times in the past, and state governments have just failed to act. So like many things in Australia, state governments don't always cooperate and play nicely with each other. And certainly on an energy perspective, I had previously worked in water. Water is an absolute disgrace. So I just couldn't handle how state governments could just do whatever they want. So I, of course, switched to electricity and energy. It's much more fun. But yeah, of course, the state governments are really just failing to act. And because we have, I guess, different political persuasions and ideologies that then change over time, that can lead to, a natural tension between federal and state, policies and just the incentive structures that they all face. So the next slide is, I just want to caveat this with, no one really likes the prospect of an academic, saying, I told you so. So I told you so. So in, several years ago, we read a paper on what would happen, of course, when we were shift from coal to gas. We don't have a carbon price anymore. However, this is still, the simulation I'm about to show you that doesn't have a gas price in it. It's not necessarily quite the one that's in the paper, but it's certainly from that modeling. But it really, we saw the marginal pass-through rates of the cost of carbon at the time for this paper, but certainly for the pass-through rates for the cost of gas, was really going to see a change in market bidding behavior. So market behavior shifts to, obviously seek what's referred to as infra-marginal rents. So of course, to seek additional rent to pay a portfolio of generation, a company that has a portfolio of generation assets, they're going to engage in strategic behavior that is not only quite concerning, but they're deliberately trying to bid and withdraw supply to increase volatility and market price. So as again, no one likes an academic saying, I told you so, because they did this, almost 10 years ago, but it did. So simulated prices for the NEM in 2035, obviously spot market volatility significantly increases. And this is largely due to the linkage of natural gas production in the eastern states to the international markets. And by no stretch of the imagination could we have foreseen a $45 price. I mean, this is only at a $15 price in 2035. So, obviously, without a carbon price in this particular scenario, obviously we see black coal and brown coal still online in 2035, which is just obscene by Australian standards. So, but the increase in volatility and spiking of prices well above, on average, the sort of $14,000 range and $15,000 range in Australia right now is far beyond what we could have foreseen, but the behavioural circumstances are very similar. So this spot market volatility is really, and certainly because we have an energy-only market, it is really of quite a concern. So I suspect that in the future, we're going to have a reconsideration of the market design, specifically around capacity payments. But I think that those capacity payments are more likely to favour traditional generation assets, which would keep our emissions intensity of electricity quite high by comparison to other developed countries. So yeah, I think that the transition is going to be very bumpy. And I think we're going to have to pay probably quite a lot more than we had expected. This is a problem that I think the previous government knew that they could kick down the road. So it may not have, they may have obviously been re-elected at the election this year. They could have been re-elected, but I think that they foresaw that this is going to be a problem that they don't really want to deal with. So anyway, yes, thanks for coming along.
Okay, thanks, Liam, for the very, very good actually summary of what had happened and with deep discussions. Yes, apparently, as you mentioned, that the Australian energy crisis is actually more like a summer-made. Naturally, we are the world's largest, one of the largest coal exporter and the gas exporter, and there we suddenly feel we have a problem, so shortage of energy supplier issue. I think we will have more discussion in the discussion session. Now I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Liang to feedback. I will share his slides on behalf. Hopefully this time it work well. Dr. Liang, you can try so whether you can. I think for speaking is no problem, right?
Thank you, Dr. Shi. Wow, this sounds good. Sorry for some technology problem, and now I think everything get okay. And thank you for Ms. Feng. Thank you for this forum. I think it's a very good platform to share some new ideas, some method to with all of the experts in this power market region. And I'm Liang Zhifei, and I'm working in the Guangzhou Power Exchange, and my major is mainly about the power market. So what I want to talk about is mainly focused on the innovation and the prospects of power market in southern China, and it could be much similar in other parts of China. And I will give you a short brief about our policy on promoting the renewable energy, and then I want to talk something about the crisis that we have been facing since last year, and some approach we want to take to make the market get better and get smoothly operated. And that's what I want to talk about today. And the first part is about the feature of our southern region. And we can see this big picture. This is the overview of southern region. The southern region covers 5 provinces, and the maximum power load is 216 million kilowatts in the year 2021. And here, this slide shows the high proportion of renewable energy, and we can see that by the end of the year 2021, the proportion of renewable energy installed capacity in southern China reached 47%, and during the year 2018 and 2020, the proportion of renewable energy generation reached over 50%, and it got increasing each year. And the wind and the solar power generation is almost fully absorbed. Okay. Here I want to give a short brief about our market mechanism. And for the China southern region, and our aim is to build a regional market. And however, this market is combined by 5 provincial power markets and one unique interprovincial market. And we can see this picture. And in Guangdong province, the market mechanism is about medium and long-term trading, as well as the spot market. And the other 4 provinces, and we are running medium and long-term trading, just like we make annual trading, monthly trading, and something like that. And among these provinces, our Guangzhou Power Exchange, we run annual and monthly power trading. There have some energy. There are some Yunnan to Guangdong contract, and the Guizhou to Guangdong contract, and also we have some extra. And in the wet season, in the rain season, there might be some monthly auction for the water, for the hydropower. Yeah, okay. This is the market mechanism. Here I want to introduce some key policy for renewable energy priority. And since the year 2017, our government, central government, NDRC and the NEB, they released a list of policies about the notice on orderly deregulating generation and the consumption. Here are some three abstracts. The newly built coal-fired power generator will be scheduled in power market by trading. That means the core power can only get scheduled by its contract signed with the consumer and something like that. And the hydropower in Yunnan province, just like we can see in last slide, they should be the hydropower should be absorbed by inter-province trading. And in the year 2019, NDRC released another policy. It's about the notice on establishing and improving the guarantee for renewable energy consumption. And the key issue in this policy is determining the weight of consumption responsibility for each provincial administrative region. And okay, let's get to the next slide. And here is the table, and we can see in the year 2020, NDRC released another policy. That means that is the notice on the responsibility weights of renewable energy consumption in each province. And in this policy, we can see in the table the responsibility weight for each province is determined. And in Guangdong province, we can see in the year 2020, the lowest weight is 28.5%. That means the energy consumption, the power consumption in Guangdong province must contain at least 28% of renewable energy. And this is the key point of this policy. And with this policy, Guangdong province have to take into operation or buy or import energy, renewable energy from other provinces, or do investment for renewable energy, solar and wind in Guangdong province. And this policy, I think, could be the key point to supporting energy, renewable energy. Okay. Here, for the, as we all know, for the carbon peak and the neutralization, this policy, and we might face some challenges for power supply and pricing. And in the year 2021, and I think not in China, but in other countries of the world, we are facing something in common. That means the rapid growth of renewable energy, and we have to face some uncertainty of prices and uncertainty of power supply. And here I have some very short thinking about this new circumstance. The pressure of power supply increases, and in the year 2030, the installed capacity of wind and solar generation in southern region might increase by 200 million kilowatts, while the effective capacity will only increase by 30 million kilowatts, and that means the effective ratio is only 15%, and the core power is transformed into a regulatory generation, meaning providing power and supplemented by electricity. And we can see the high renewable bidding leads to lower and upper bound price frequently. That means sometime in the peak power of solar generation, the price might be zero, and while in the night when the solar power generation decreases, and the price might get very high, and the pricing mechanism is required so as to prevent some misjudgments for forward pricing and distortion of investment. And that means I think the investment might determine what kind of price can lead to a stable revenue for this solar wind investment, solar and wind investment. Okay. Here I want to introduce the power trading by the year 2022, and with almost 7 years of deregulation of China, the power market in majority in the most provinces might be the energy only market, and that means we have not yet built the established that capacity market for all provinces. So we use the long-term trading to make the price stable and to make the energy supply stable. So we can see in the picture we use about 80% of trading in annual trading, and then we almost take 10% and 15% in monthly trading. And we have 5 provinces. 5 provinces have already started the day-ahead market, that means the spot market, as well as the intraday, the real-time market. This proportion might be 5%, and this is the process we do the energy only market. And also we have some price gap for all markets, and we can see the majority of market trading is long-term and mid-term trading. So we just use the price gap for this trading. And before October in the year 2021, the price gap, the higher price gap is 110% of benchmark price of coal generation, and the lower gap we can see is 85%. And since October in the year 2021, and we all know we are facing a shortage of energy supply. That means the price of coal power energy get higher. To maintain some energy supply for coal power, and the price gap get higher. It's about 120% of benchmark price. Okay. And in future, we can see with the rapidly growing of that renewable energy, we need we need a very long process in the planning sector, trading sector, and the delivering sector. In 3 sectors, which we need several approaches to trade the renewable energy, as well as to coordinate the renewable energy and the fossil energy. And here I make a very short design, a very simple design for this trading. In the planning sector, that means in 5 or even 20 years in future, we should guarantee power supply and support investment revenue. That we use PPA, capacity market, or capacity compensation to meet the project financing need of generation investment. And we use unique and life cycle green power ownership to guarantee that the consumer can have its green power ownership. Okay, and in this trading sector, it's about 1 year or 5 years in the future. The energy trading of generation and the consumption is met in this trading. We build this energy market for all kinds of generator, ancillary service market, including reserve and black start markets for regulatory generator, including coal power, gas, and hydro pump storage. And in the delivering sector, it's about from day ahead to real-time market. It's a spot market, ancillary service, demand side response, and this is it's a simple design for marketing future. Okay, here comes the key issue. It's something I want to talk about. I think it's not quite complete. And we all know since October last year, we have been facing the crisis. The crisis might be included three kind of crisis: the generation capacity shortage, the lack of willingness to trade, to generate, and even the market price is difficult to cover the operating cost. And if the market under such
Okay, so do we have another technical challenges?
杨博士
I think there is
can you hear me?
probably.
Okay, I call him now.
Let me stop the sharing. I think, yeah, very unfortunately, this is like what we are experiencing in the energy market. Unexpected things happen. But it's, let's see how many slides going. I think there are actually 3 more slides. We are going by Zhifei. I guess he get another interruptions in the collection. So I probably, given the interest times, I will probably move to our discussion. And when Zhifei come back, I will invite him to further discuss about the crisis intervention and others. And for the discussion side, I will first invite Mrs. Jiang Li. She is the managing editor for Energy Observer. Probably she has a lot of questions coming from the presentations we have done before and for other panelists. Jiang Li, I leave the floor with you.
Okay, thanks for Mr. Shi's introduction. And I learned a lot after listening to all the presentations at the forum today. It's a great honor to share some of my observations and propose some questions mainly based on several cases of energy transition challenges around the world followed by our team. I think the first is the dilemma of the long-term and short-term goals. According to my knowledge, Australia has made the long-term goal of energy transition, and it is accelerating these years. A report published by the Australian Energy Market Operator in December 2021 assumed that all brown coal generations and over 2/3 of black coal generations could withdraw by 2032. The coal power plants could have signed up multiple year contracts to avoid the risks of price volatility of the primary energy. But with the expectation of withdrawal, they reduced the proportion of long-term contracts. So when the price rose sharply, the plants would have no other means to recover the increasing costs other than relying on the spot market. So in the process of the energy transition, what kind of policies are proper to manage the expectations of fossil fuel and generation suppliers with proper and generation suppliers? And another trade-off point lies in meeting the goals of providing sufficient energy supply, safe production, and environmental protection. Take the coal production of China last year as an example. We observed that when there was serious imbalance between supply and demand, different requirements from different departments contradicted with each other in some cases. For example, the coal supplier was asked to increase their production in a very short time, but it didn't meet the conditions for a safety requirement. The requirements from different departments are well functioned in normal state and could usually achieve a good result, but it can be mutually contradictory in emergency cases. This reminds us that it is necessary to coordinate different departments and give clear instructions to corporations. So what should we do if we face this similar challenges next time? And the third debate upon free market, the third is the debate upon free market and government intervention. Australia suspended the electricity spot market this time, while China put forward guiding prices for long-term contracts of coal last year. We may have to answer several questions in the future. What are the criteria for market failure? Do we have to define it in the electricity market rules? If so, what basis should we rely on in different countries? In the case of Australia, we also noticed that according to AEMC, the administered price cap APC will be modified when necessary, but the interval of modification should be no less than 3 years. It hasn't been modified since 2008, which led to the suspension this time. In China, one of the pilot provinces of spot market, Shanxi, initiated trading curb due to sudden output reduction of renewable energy last year. So what kind of rules could adapt to the fast changes of the market to avoid a reversible loss, and also respect the role of the market and avoid unnecessary interference? It could be also important for us to seek for some answers. So that's all I want to share, and I hope some of the questions would get some answers. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Jiang Li, for the question. I think it will be provided for the discussion for our panelists later on. Before we start the next discussion, I will ask Mr. Liang to make the to finish the last few slides. It will be very quick, but I suddenly forgot why I cannot find the slides on this. What's going on? Yeah, show. Oh, sorry. Show all windows probably. Yeah, it's coming here. So yeah, Trifid, now we can start from here. I think it should be, sorry, it should be here. Can you see? Yeah. Oh, seems still we cannot hear from. I think we still cannot hear. Okay, no worries. Good things always not have a smooth road. Our next discussion will be Professor Song Feng. She's a well-known energy economics and currently working Renmin University, China, and also the director for the Department of Energy Economics. Yeah, Ms. Song, I give the floor to you.
Okay, thank you, Xinpeng. And is that okay? You listen well?
Yeah, no problem. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. It's very, I think I got very inspiring and very informative presentation from this morning's discussion, especially for the deep reasons behind the recent we can call that electricity crisis in Australia. And I remembered, as far as I remembered, I'm studying the fall electricity crisis happening in the history, like the one in California, which have a very profound implications for the later electricity sector restructure, and the one from last year's ERCOT to Texas, and the one also happened recently in China last year, China's electricity crisis, and this one. You all see the electricity shortage during a period of time in all four cases, but if you look at the deep reasons, they probably are different. So I have several observations. First, electricity crisis is not necessarily a sign of the market failure. As far as I heard from this morning's discussion, for this Australia electricity crisis is not because the design failure of the electricity market, but because of the the natural gas policy. It doesn't have enough reservation, and as so if you look at China's last year's electricity shortage, is not because China was is establishing electricity market. It's not because of market causing the crisis. It's because the market is not designing well, and also because the upstream, like the coal industry, is how the coal industry's policy causing the coal price to spike. Then the cost could now to transfer from to the end users. But like last year's ERCOT crisis is also not when people were debating whether it was caused by the market design. But I think the consensus was no. Scarcing pricing was playing a role, its role. So I think the bottom line is that my view is that electricity shortage is not necessarily the failure of the electricity market. Sometimes it may be the sign of the electricity designs problems, such as the California's market. Afterwards, the economists found that market power, that market power, accessing the market power, make the case worse. So that's my first observation. The second thing I want to say is that we have to admit what the market can do and the market cannot do. We know that market is good at delivering the efficiency. It is good at giving the proper incentives to motivate the market participants to minimize their cost. But it's not good in delivering the equity outcomes like protection of the low income, is not good at controlling pollution, is not even good at securing the adequate supply if the market is not properly designed. I was looking at all the literatures of the market, the market restructure in the United States and in Britain. So one lesson emerged is the motivating the generators to invest on new capacity is becoming a key element in all these countries. Especially with increasing penetration of the wind and the source. I think this point has been touched by previous discussing speakers. I won't go into too far because of the time limit. But I think the electricity market is so complex, and it also so comprehensive because it involves so many elements like security, the energy security, and the equity issue is such a necessary goods for the ordinary life, and also the climate change and pollution. All these elements are all involved in market design. But we have to know what the market is good at and market is not good at. Like this crisis, I don't think crisis is the market failure. If the market is designed properly, as you need to couple with other things like the crisis capacity policies, or the capacity like when the crisis happens, we call it emergency cope with measures. You need to prepare for that, and that's my second point of view. And the third one is about China's electricity reform. I know many of you are not China focused, but as far as China's electricity reform, I found it's extremely difficult. Against the background, the electricity market design is already very complex and difficult in all the countries, but in China, it has to add more elements, because China's government is so concerned all the objectives, as I said, like the electricity security, like the protection of low-income people, and they are so afraid, and they don't want to see the price volatility. I see Dr. Vanna showed that price volatility will be increased in Australia. I expect if we let the price to volatile in China, the same things happen. It's with so much more wind and solar is for sure to happen. So, but that the government doesn't want to see that. So when they design the market, they give a lot of restrictions like the price cap and the price floor. They intervene the market because they don't believe in the market. So that's the difficulties in China. The market and government, the boundary is so blurred, and so you cannot expect so far. So I think my bottom line is that if you want to give, the market reform of China's, pushing forward, next step is to, the key is to see what the government can do and cannot do, what the market can do and cannot do. So I think it's always is moving forward is a key thing. So that's a word called pay the Caesar what belongs to Caesar and God what belongs to God. I think it's a English saying. We have similar thing in Chinese. So we always say that, but it's not still there yet. Okay, that's my 3 point of view. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for Song Feng. Yeah, I agree with the observation. That one of the commentary I write in my piece is that probably Australia needs to introduce some lifeline consumption and other policy to protect the vulnerable group, including residents and consumer, rather than say we have to stop the market. Because market is only part of the big energy system that support the transitions. Before I move to the next commentary, I probably invited my colleague Steven for some final comments. because he needs to leave soon. So Steven, I leave the floor to you.
Thank you. Very short comment, and it actually fits perfectly, even though that wasn't prepared, to Feng Song's last remark, because I just wanted to highlight that also in most Western countries, the power plants operating now, the majority was actually built in a monopoly. So if you look at the power plants built in Germany, I'm only living a bit under 10 years in Australia, but most of my research was in Germany, and the German market was liberalized in 2000. So that means the majority of power plants operating now were actually built and invested in the monopoly. And we have now the first turnover of power plants, which have to be financed in a market, but they need to compete with very short-term changes. And I think that is one of the things. So, and the second observation I have is the price hikes and everything. It's always related to fuel price fluctuations. Renewables don't have fuel prices. So renewables are the way out. The problem is the renewables need a totally different infrastructure in terms of power lines, in terms of, not totally, but some expanded, and batteries, storage systems, demand side management, something like that, which means we need a long-term framework, a strategic long-term decision where to go. And that needs to then be embedded in the market framework. But just to throw it to the market and say, well, you go for it, try to make it happen in the market with very short-term thinking, that doesn't work. So we need infrastructure investments, need a decision horizon of 20 and 30 years and not a year. So therefore, a market will never be function if we don't have the basic long-term decisions in what direction we want to go.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. I think, Steven, for the comment. Indeed, we need actually system view, long-term planning, but also adaptive process. We need to make change accordingly. Before I move to the next commentator, I will invite Zhifei to finish his presentation. It's good to see that we still have electricity supplier, so we can see now him around. So
thank you, Dr. Shi. I think that my microphone might be okay.
Yeah, now it's perfect.
Oh well, that's okay. Good. That's good. Yeah. Thank you, perfect. And sorry everyone. And I will take 5 minutes to finish my introduction about the market intervention and under crisis. And I talked a lot of things about the market trading. And
oh, okay. Sorry, we have another probably challenges. Zhifei, you can try to switch off the camera. I think we are all actually eager to hear key insights, but the systems sometimes work against us. So yeah, okay, so I probably, Rabindra, I probably invite you to give your comments. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for having me, and thanks a lot to the keynote speakers, especially Liam, for your very thorough and enlightening presentation. And thanks so much, Jiang, for asking such important questions. Well, we don't have a very clear answer for all the questions you have asked in front of us, but I hope we can help you with providing some clues. Okay, first of all, let me put my commentary in the context of this workshop by saying that the solutions to energy transition are not just technological, which Sven highlighted in his talk, but rather they will require a coordinated approach through appropriate economic and regulatory solutions. Okay, so that's my starting point, and let me prove what I've just said. Now, if you look at liberalized electricity markets around the world, and they have been performing under a lot of stress. Okay, the war in Ukraine was not the only reminder for us to accept that fact. Okay, so Singapore, for instance, have been sweating with rising input prices since a couple of years before, right? So the rising wholesale electricity prices, has been a problem in Singapore. Many retailers got busted because they couldn't actually pass on the full cost rise to the consumers, which is somewhat a reminder of the Californian 2003 crisis, which Feng Song mentioned to all of us in our previous commentary for today. Now, if we look at Australia, so has the market failed? I mean, as an economist, it's not a difficult question to answer. Yes, the market has failed. If there is underproduction, if there is underconsumption, you know, where some consumers are left out of the market, which otherwise shouldn't have happened, yes, the market has failed. Now, the next question is, should we deny market failure? The answer to this question is no. Let's accept and live with market failure, because markets are bound to fail. These are inevitable outcomes, you see. But then how do we live with market failures? Is to have right policies to guide and support market failures. Now, in the Australian context, the historical suspension of the national electricity market, it happened a couple of weeks before, which was the first time, right? I mean, if it was a suspension of the national electricity market as a whole. But then if we look at 2016, the South Australian electricity market was suspended for 13 days. Okay, so, and if we look at the three key energy policy targets around energy affordability, security of supply, and environmental sustainability, obviously, has the Australian electricity market been able to cater to these distinct but interrelated energy policy objectives? The answer largely is no, right? So now we have a Labour government in place. The government has very ambitious climate policy targets, right? 43% emission reduction by 2030 and net zero by 2050. Now, should we leave this alone to the market, okay, to deliver these ambitious climate objectives? The answer is no. So the electricity, so then what should the electricity market for the future involve, okay, in delivering these different energy policy goals? Obviously, it should involve a right mix of markets versus policy elements in it. The government will have to be involved in the market, okay, to guide the market. All right. So what should those? What can those involvements take? What shapes can these different government involvements take? Okay. So first and foremost, the energy only market design, is it fit for purpose? If you look at Western Australia, as Liam said, okay, they have a different electricity market arrangement in place. They have an energy market with capacity payments. But then if we were to transpose the same idea in the East Coast, I mean, do we actually provide capacity payments to the dirty power plants? I mean, what does that mean to the climate change targets then? Okay, so yeah, so there is that question that needs to be answered. The next question is around the contracting of of the generators. Should we rely on a market, or should we have a single authority, sign bilateral power purchase agreements with the generators and mitigate the revenue risks to these generators? So should we go back to the single buyer model? Okay, that's another question that needs to be answered. How about government being heavily involved when it comes to network ownership, such as transmission expansion, which might actually be needed if more and more renewables enter the wholesale electricity market and the network constraints and congestions are to be alleviated. And last but not the least, how about the financing of renewable storage? Okay, maybe government has a role to play in the financing of such renewable storage. So so my bottom line conclusion is that, look, there's no point denying market failure. Market has failed, but that's also not to be surprised about, because markets will fail. But then we need to have the right supporting policies, to guide the functioning of the market. So we are looking at a future electricity market where both market-based elements as well as government involvement will be crucial in delivering these three distinct but interrelated energy policy goals. Thank you so much.
Yes, thanks, Ravinder. I think it highlights that the market failure, and that reason we need the government and we need the design and set the principles, the ways, including compare with different market between Australia and China. Or that another reason is why actually we're sitting here and we want to explore how to prevent this unintended consequence happen. Our next commentator is Dr. Liu Dongsheng. He has been working in the energy sector for many decades, and particularly with the practical experience from the AGL in Australia. So, Dr. Liu, I leave the floor with you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to have this opportunity to meet people I know before. Also, thank you for the organizer to put the effort make this happen. There's a lot of things probably around this market suspension, but I probably more interested in one particular point. That is this administrator price tag, the $3 price. We know this price has been there for quite a long period of time. And originally, we have a logic that analyze the price, which is the most expensive fuel cost. So at that time, it was assumed to be the cost if we burn oil. That was quite a natural thing because that time gas price probably only $2 or $3. With no comparison to the oil price. But now, apparently, the gas price, because the export market could become very high. Actually, it was very high. And so what is the new way of economically rational to make this price which can reflect the high gas price? This probably is the issue there. But the trouble with that is gas price fluctuates with the international LNG market. So it will become quite a tricky issue. Okay, that's very much what I want to make a comment. Thank you for inviting me. That's it.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Liu. Indeed, actually, once our market is interconnected, then you have no way to escape from the international fluctuation. That's another way to show actually a good functional market sometimes create trouble, particularly in Australia case. If people are complaining that LNG export, if there is no export, Australia market will be isolated. The gas price will probably stay at $8 per gigajoule, a very comfortable zone. But very unfortunately, that's life, and also the consequence of one of the consequences of globalization. Our last but not least commentator panelist is Dr. Mui Yang. He's a senior energy analyst at the NBEN, UK-based think tank. Mui and I have been working a lot on energy transitions, including policies, and he's a political and social scientist. He asked Mui to give his view on this issue. Mui.
Thanks, Professor Shi, and thank you for Energy Observer, ACET, and ACRI for organizing such a wonderful activity, and for also getting me involved in this insightful discussion. And we have seen lots of useful discussion on mainly on the causes of the recent power crisis so far. as those mentioned by Professor Lim and so on. Actually, there has been substantial commentaries and discussion on the causes for this power crisis in Australia over the past few weeks, and I have been tracking these discussions. And my feeling is that a consensus seems to have emerged that this power crisis is caused by high electricity demand driven by an unusually widespread cold snap at the start of winter, combined with some supply side complications, especially unexpected breakdown of some coal-fired power plants, and a reliance on gas for providing system flexibility when wind and solar becomes less available, and record high gas prices in the international market and its flow-on impact on Australia gas generators. And these causes, in my view, are just symptoms. There are some more fundamental causes, and these causes are related to the growing inability of the existing power system in Australia to provide sufficient long duration flexibility to deal with seasonal balancing of fluctuations in renewable generation. For example, in winter months with very little wind and solar power. And the current approach we are using here in Australia is to use conventional power plants like gas-fired power plants to provide such a system flexibility over a long period of time. But the capacity of conventional power plant to assume such a supportive role has been affected over the past few weeks by factors such as shrinking market, high and fluctuating fuel prices, and so on. And the policymakers has been slow in reacting to this new development in the electricity market. This issue is not unique to Australia. It may also happen in other countries, especially when wind and solar takes off and start to challenge the dominant position of fossil fuels. And so now I want to draw everyone's attention to not only the cause of this crisis, but also to the solutions or the options for rectifying the situation, for preventing this crisis from happening again. I think one option for rectifying the situation currently under consideration is to reintroduce some forms of market payment mechanisms or capacity market. The question I have is that I don't have answers to that, but my question is whether capacity payment alone is sufficient to encourage the uptake of variable technologies for providing system flexibility, especially to the extent considered adequate to accommodate rising wind and solar generation. Actually, the problem is that there are already several clean technologies that can replace conventional power plants to provide long duration system flexibility. These technologies include, for example, more interconnectors to link different regions to use their generations and storage to balance out the supply shortfalls, and more demand-side responses and more long-time storage, such as hydrogen battery storage or pumped hydro and so on. But some of these options takes time, and some of them are not mature enough to be deployed at scale. So this raises the question that capacity payment alone may not be sufficient. And I have another question, which is for my friend Rabindra, but since he just left for other meetings. The question is that, shall we rely on market for facilitating the transition towards a clean electricity future? My answer is probably not, because the function of a market is to creating a functioning electricity market is contingent upon so many things. And one key such thing is strong institutions for governing the functioning of the electricity market. But having strong institutions are always a luxury in many developing countries. In addition to that, given the very short time frame we are having at the moment to fully decarbonize the electricity sector in order to attain to put us onto a 1.5 aligned pathways, I'm not quite sure whether market is the best or most effective way or instrument for facilitating the electricity transition. So that's something I want to ask Rabindra and other participants. Thank you, Professor Shi. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Mui. And I think, yeah, it's interesting thing that what is the role of market in such a unexpected, uncharted territory of energy transition. The past experience probably wouldn't have much given the energy neutrality, which in a major country as you wouldn't see or haven't seen before. So whether we are in the good shape to do that, I think the question are very interesting. And I think we now back to our keynote speaker, Zhifei, see whether he can make a final from beginning to the end. So it's good. These our events are very, very comprehensive. Zhifei, can you try? I think, yeah, probably the collections is still an issue, has some problem. Yeah. Okay. I said that given the times we have, we can only accommodate one question. I think Yixuan, you have a question you want to speak out, or you want me to read out? Probably can speak out. Yeah. Oh.
Okay, fine. So can anyone hear me?
Yeah, no problem. Please go ahead.
Yes. Okay, so thanks for professors and all the experts. And I've just got one question. So my question is that we just noticed that the federal government's Energy Security Board, they have been tested with designing the new mechanism which would pay generators through an auction process for the capacity they can provide. So my question is, if a capacity market is built, so will it be better? And how do you look at the role of the capacity market to incentivize the generators for reliable electricity supply? Thank you.
Yeah, I think Liam will reply. And it's good, actually. I will leave you to reply and also make any other final remarks.
Well, I think just to sort of initially, just to reinforce what Rabindra said earlier, that I think that policy and the economics of the market are really going to be the linchpin in moving through the transition. We're not going to be able to reach our 40-odd% emissions reduction without a concerted and collaborative effort on behalf of both states and federal government. And, you know, the private sector are just not capable on their own in delivering this transition. And with respect to the Energy Security Board, I think it's still unclear as to whether that would provide a long-term mechanism to ensure we have a security of supply and reliable supply, given that we have such an old and aging coal-fired fleet. While there is certainly gas capacity that is available, again, the supply of gas, I think, is being used as a way of wedging state governments to ensure that not only that they can open up areas for exploration and production, particularly Victoria. I think this is a sort of a bit of a I think they're trying to blackmail the state government, basically, for lack of a better term, and that I think that any new supply would have to have that domestic reservation to ensure that, you know, there's enough fuel to even run the things. I mean, while it's enough to say, well, we'll give you capacity payments, these generators could be losing money or lost revenue, even though the majority of them already have contracts of supply. This is making up for lost potential revenue. I'm not sure that this mechanism or capacity market could actually deliver this for everyone. Yeah, it's still unclear. The mechanism is, while they've detailed the proposition, I don't think that the mechanism is necessarily, and the other surrounding legislation is really, quite there yet.
Yes, thanks, Liam. And I think your final remarks posed more questions than answer. I think that's also one of my feeling for our discussion.
Yeah.
Really apologize for my poor time management. We didn't have too much time to discuss. But I think for energy transition, it's an ongoing and challenging process, and also toward uncharted territory. So during those kind of process, we definitely will see a lot of challenges and issues coming out. As actually today, our events showing that we have more questions rather than concluded. And probably we also have a different view among ourselves. For example, the gas market, whether we should get gas security mechanism, or we should invent other institutional arrangement to make up the vulnerable part of the market, and then let the market do the market, like Professor mentioned, the God and Kesa or CISA, whatever, do whatever their own jobs. And yeah, I hope for in the future we will have more opportunity and time, particularly to see it physically, and with more times. I think for this kind of discussion, we at least need 1 day and probably even 2 days to debate like a gas market, electricity market, and other system change to support the market. And probably even fourth issue, we need to discuss what planning or institutional arrangement we need to put in place to make sure our energy transition will smoothly for our general public. We also today actually meet the final highlights from one of our key speakers, Zhifei. That's another reason probably we need to arrange something else in the notified future. Hopefully we will have more time. We don't need to see such a kind of crisis period that we rush to have an event within 2 weeks. So given that, I really appreciate all our panelists for your kindly support to us. I actually, even I worked in China before, but I haven't worked in China in the past 2 decades. It's probably still even challenging in China to assemble such a high profile panelists in essentially 1 week's times for the event. And I personally think it's a very good occasion. And the reason we haven't have any conclusions because nobody have a conclusion, nobody have answer. Probably even we ask God, probably will be more difficult than what we thought. But that's the reason including actually we as ISETS, we have the platform to here for continuous dialogue and engagement. I also actually, thanks to Feng Jie and Energy Observer and Ke Ying, I haven't let her to speak about the Innovation Center for the Emission Trading Scheme. I think all us as a researcher, as well actually we probably have such audience from industry and others are sitting here, probably all are interested with any transition and want to know how we can do better to minimize the disturbance while we protect our environment and Earth. I think with that, I thank you all again for our speakers as well as the audience for coming here. And we look forward to seeing other occasions, either in ISETS or our partner organization events or any speakers events, and or probably even see our audience also organize your own events. And also I encourage you to come together to discuss energy transition. It's not just an academic issue, it's not an industrial issue, it's an issue that matters for everybody and also for our public, which or for the people, which all the energy policy, economy, everything means for. So we need to put the people at the first and heart of our policy, and let's work together to make our marginal contribution. Yeah, thank you all, and I will see you in the future events. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Bye.